Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start now. Peace be upon us all. Good evening. Om Swastiastu. Greetings of virtue. Distinguished Her Excellency Minister Mulyani, His Excellency the Governor of Bank Indonesia, distinguished participants, and the press corps. Good evening and thank you for your patience and for joining this press conference. I hope we are staying safe and well. And we are thankful that the Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting and the Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting went very well. This evening, we have the Minister of Finance and the Governor of Bank Indonesia. Good evening to you both. We extend our prayers, our deepest sympathy to those affected by COVID-19, and we pray for their speedy recovery. Good evening, all media friends. We are going now to follow the briefing from the Minister and from Bank Indonesia Governor. Thank you, Mr. Prastowo, and Mr. Warjo will also join me in providing a brief in this conference. We have just concluded the first Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting as part of the Indonesia G20 presidency. As we know, the G20 meeting focus of part of the meeting is the finance track. Finance track convenes finance ministers and the central bank governors of G20 countries and the states and international organizations invited to attend the G20 meeting. And in the finance track, we discussed issues, important issues that are relevant with the Indonesia's G20 presidency priorities. In the finance track, we discussed 6 very important items, very relevant for Indonesia and for the world, and with significant impacts. First is the discussion on global economic and health. This includes getting the discussion and report from the Joint Finance and Health Task Force, a task force established by the finance ministers and health ministers in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to create a pandemic preparedness response. We also discussed international finance architecture, and the Bank Indonesia governor will tell us more about this, as well as by central bank issues. So those were the 2 sessions led by Mr. Warjo. On the first day, we also organized a high-level seminar attended by prominent names, and it was about the strengthening of global health architecture. In the seminar, we discussed about pandemic-related issues and how the world can prepare better, because we know that the pandemic affects everyone around the globe, and the impacts are precedented, very significant impact financial-wise, with significant economic contraction and very difficult for some countries to recover, and not to mention the social and health impacts to those affected by COVID-19. The pandemic has also caused loss of lives and serious social impacts. And so the seminar discussed about global health architecture and how we can strengthen that going forward. There were three key issues discussed on that day, and I led the discussion. The first session was on sustainable finance. We talked about how the world sees the climate change challenge and how can we formulate financial policies to create credible actions. In the next session of today, it was about infrastructure. In that session, we also discussed about the vital role of infrastructure for the global communities and how the pandemic affected the rate and situation of infrastructure development in many countries, and how G20 countries can build sustainable infrastructure without compromising quality and to engage more the private sector. The third and final session, very important, where we achieved a lot of progress, was about international taxation. We discussed about international agreements on tax and concerning two pillars. The first pillar was about taxation in the digital sector. This has been one of the tense issues discussed around G20 countries, but it was agreed on the taxation mechanism in the digital sector. And we know that digital sector crosses country boundaries and is a transnational phenomenon. And the second was about global taxation imposed on transnational companies or multinational companies, where there may be risk of tax avoidance and tax evasion. And we talked about how all countries can work together and to circumvent and to prevent tax avoidance and tax evasion through the second pillar, and that is to apply minimum taxation and to have agreement frameworks. Of the many items discussed today, among those items were the condition or the state of developing and poor countries, where they face heavy indebtedness. And we talk about how to work with creditors, especially for low-income countries experiencing debt crisis. We talk about how we need a global cooperation among creditors to provide rooms for those countries to recover. Today, we issued a communique as the result of the 2 days meeting, and I'm very pleased because the spirit for collaboration among G20 members, both on side of the finance ministers and the central bank governors, have been very strong. We know that we are facing tough challenges. As we know, in the world today, we are seeing progresses of recovery, but the progress is uneven. And there are new challenges because of the pandemic, as well as new challenges, for example, the surge of commodity prices, supply disruption, as well as mismatch between demand and supply that caused a rise in inflation that would in turn imply or have consequence on policies in countries, and spillover issues may arise. So these are the new challenges that we are seeing because of inequitable recovery rate, because of gaps in vaccine access or gaps in economic recovery. And therefore, the spirit of collaboration is important. And as mentioned by the president during the opening speech, geopolitical situation adds to global recovery challenges that G20 countries are facing. And we are going to continue to lead the G20 finance track, the first finance ministers and central bank governors meeting. We are having another meeting in April. That is the sideline of spring meeting, IMF World Bank in Washington, D.C. And then in July, we are going to host the FMCBG meeting, and we'll meet again in October. It's also the sideline of IMF World Bank annual meeting in Washington, D.C. The results of the finance ministers and central bank governors meeting will inform the meetings or the summit, the G20 summit in October. So that would be my introduction, and I welcome Mr. Wajio to provide more specific issues discussed in G20, specifically in the finance track and
Thank you, Madam Minister of Finance. 10 is the biggest number. We need to continue to learn so that we can be smarter. Please, and let's work together to ensure the success of Indonesia G20 presidency. Recover together, recover stronger. Yeah, it's okay if it's not very relevant. Your Excellency, Madam Minister of Finance, dear media journalists, good afternoon. Greetings, Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Nama Budaya, greetings of virtue. As stated by the Minister of Finance about the agenda discussed in Finance Track, we also have some agenda related to the central banks. Yesterday, I chaired a session on international financial architecture and the third session on financial sector reform. Financial sector reform. I will share some highlight of the second session on the international financial architecture. In this session, we discussed about various issues that are relevant to the global financial sector, especially international monetary system. In particular, how to plan and anticipate normalization policies in developed countries, especially the normalization of monetary policies or monetary policies on normalization. Madam Minister has explained that the global economic recovery is continued, even though in the short term or in the short run, we will be faced various problems, especially related to exit policies, both in terms of fiscal and monetary, including the plan to increase the Fed fund interest rate, as well as the risk related to the global supply chain disruption energy crisis, and geopolitical tension. In the International Financial Architecture session, we discussed how policy normalization should be done in a considering manner and how developed and developing countries should anticipate this and should address this. We, in the second session, agreed that in order to support the global macroeconomy and global financial system, the G20 plans to implement a well-calibrated and well-considered normalization policy, as well as well-planned normalization policy, as well as well-communicated normalization policy. This is important so that these policies have minimum impact to the global financial market, as well as minimizing the impact to the developing countries in terms of the spillover effect. This is also very important to ensure that the global economic recovery can be continued, and in the long run, we can return to our long-term economic growth trend, and also to address the scarring effect of the pandemic to the real sector. Therefore, when developed countries taking the normalization policy, the G20 countries are committed to have a well-calibrated, well-planned, as well as well-communicated policies. Of course, in line with the unique situation and condition of each country. What about the anticipation measures that should be taken by the emerging and developing countries? This is where emerging countries and developing countries need to take a healthy and sound macroeconomic and financial system policy, including by taking monetary policies that are not only supporting domestic economic recovery, but should also address the spillover effect due to the global economic situation. The emerging countries should also take policies to manage capital flows, the capital flows management. This is important so that the spillover effect from the global financial sector can still help the inflow of investment to developed countries. We also discussed about the importance of the use of currency for trade and investment that is more diverse in nature to ensure the resilience of developing countries in addressing the spillover effect. So those are the discussion in the Global Financial Architecture session. So from developed countries, they need to have well-calibrated, well-planned, and well-communicated policies, while the emerging countries and developing countries need to have sound macroeconomic and financial system that is sound, diversification of currency, in international trade and investment. In this session, we also discussed that amidst the global uncertainty and the need to increase the economic resilience, G20 reaffirmed its commitment to strengthen the long-term financial resilience. Therefore, G20 discussed efforts and measures to increase or to improve the sound and sustainable foreign inflow management, and to review the view of the IMF on the need of liberalization as well as the management of short-term capital inflow. In line with this, the COVID-19 pandemic also also calls for efforts to recover the international supply chain. In this case, Indonesia G20 presidency discussed the use of diversification of currency in international finance and trading by considering the cost and benefit. G20 also committed to strengthen the global financial safety net provided by the IMF to assist countries in maintaining and safeguarding their economy against the global economic shock. So that's the second session on international financial architecture. I will now move to the third session on the global financial sector reform. Overall, since the onset of the global crisis, the condition of the global financial sector is stronger, especially in terms of the banking sector. Overall, the capital adequacy ratio and the liquidity ratio and the risk management capacity of the global banking sector is strong. However, we need to see, or we also realize that the pandemic also brought some impact to the corporate sector, which will in turn affect the banking sector. And at the same time, we also have non-bank financial institutions as well as the widespread of crypto assets trade. So in this financial sector reform, G20 countries discuss about efforts to strengthen the global financial sector and how to contain the impact of the global pandemic to the financial sector so that financial institutions can find or can implement its function, including the intermediary function to contribute to the global economic recovery. Another point is how to manage risk by using technology and digitalization in the financial sector. From the risk management sector, G20 countries agreed to have a governance system for crypto assets and also monitoring system for crypto assets. The development of crypto assets is quite widespread, and if we do not manage this well, it can cause instability in the global financial sector. G20 also emphasized about the importance to continue the assessment of CBDC, central bank digital currency, and its impact to the global financial sector. From the optimization of technology, G20 countries also agreed to continue the implementation of G20 roadmap to enhance cross-border payment system. Cross-border payment system roadmap of G20 has been formulated during the presidency of Saudi Arabia. In the Italian presidency, we have formulated a roadmap for digitization of payment system in many countries, as well as to strengthen the cross-border cooperation, to expand the digitization of payment system, to promote easy transaction, fast transaction, and a cheap transaction or affordable transaction. So in our Indonesia G20 presidency, we will implement various roadmaps, these various roadmaps to promote easy, efficient, and reliable payment system. And in digitizing this payment system to be used to improve the financial inclusion, especially to develop retail transactions, as well as to support MSMEs, especially for women and youth. So I think those are the key takeouts from the two sessions that I chaired, the session on international financial architecture and the third session on financial sector reform. I'd like to return the floor to you, Madam Minister of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Governor Perry. There are many issues being discussed, actual issues in the financial sector, as well as the central bank sector, economic sector, as well as finance and fiscal. As I said it earlier, we had a historic agreement in international taxation in which we agreed to the two pillars of international tax packages. The first pillar related to the taxation for digital sector, and the second pillar is on how to address base erosion, profit shifting, tax avoidance, and tax evasion. In this meeting, we agreed that after the two principles have been agreed, we will then conduct monitoring of their implementation. In this meeting, we agreed that for the second pillar, how to address global anti-base erosion model in the second pillar and how we can implement this as an effective policy by 2023. And for the first pillar, which also requires multilateral convention, so this is on the first pillar, digital taxation, we also expect to have an agreement and full implementation by 2023. Therefore, many countries will need technical assistance, both in terms of the legislation drafting to implement this agreement domestically, as well as in terms of capacity building for their tax authority. Therefore, in this G20 meeting, we also agreed on increasing support for capacity building for developing countries that need assistance to implement these two pillars based on the timeline. And we also say that this is a very ambitious timeline. G20 will also organize a ministerial level symposium to continue to discuss these capacity building initiatives and also the implementation of these two pillars in a consistent manner. And in the discussion about sustainable finance, and this is related to a very important point because in the UN FCCC and in Glasgow COP, we have agreed to achieve a net zero emission. Then in G20, we discussed about sustainable finance. And this again requires a detailed deliberation on how sustainable finance can be established among countries, not only G20 countries, but also beyond G20. In this case, to operationalize the commitments of financial institutions on climate financing. And we will discuss about this further and more in depth about the principles and how to implement ESG, environmental, social, and governance principles in the operations of the financial institutions. Therefore, cooperation among G20 countries to formulate through the working group of sustainable finance chaired by China and United States, supported by international institutions, and the secretariat is in the UNDP, will be focused on sustainable finance, especially on the commitment of financial institutions and private sector, including discussion on the importance of policy levers, how we use public policy to leverage the participation of private sector and international community to finance climate actions. Other deliberation is on infrastructure, as I explained earlier. And in the deliberation or discussion on infrastructure, we discussed how to promote the implementation of G20 roadmap for infrastructure as an asset class. So this is a topic that has been discussed continuously from presidency to presidency. In this topic, the discussion focuses on how to leverage private sector participation for or to scale up the infrastructure development alongside with the public fund as well as financing from the multilateral development banks. Since the requirement for infrastructure is very big, up to 6.3 trillion US dollars. Therefore, all available sources need to be tapped by each and every country to develop their infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure, we also agreed how G20 can continue to promote the principle of quality infrastructure investment, principles. And we will develop indicators to identify infrastructures that fall under quality infrastructure investment. This will help many countries to select or to screen which infrastructure project to finance and to ensure the quality and sustainability of the infrastructures. We also discussed about FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. The Financial Action Task Force. FATF is a global standard setting body on AML, anti-money laundering, and CFT, counter-terrorism financing, and counter-proliferation financing. FATF, as a global cooperation, should be able to create confidence in the financial sector so that the financial sector is not being misused for money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing. In this case, FATF has issued a guidance that is constantly being reviewed on risk-based approach on virtual assets. Virtual assets including the one that was mentioned by the Mr. Governor, crypto assets, cryptocurrency. I think that's all. For financial inclusion, we also discussed about Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, which is a framework to continue to increase the role of digital technology to improve or to support access to capital for the medium, micro, small, and medium enterprises so that their productivity can be increased, and we can also promote inclusivity, especially in this financial inclusion. We have a target to assist businesses owned by marginalized and groups, including women, youth, and MSMEs that do not have any access to financial sector and unbankable, do not have any access to financial institutions. So those are the points of our discussion. And as I said earlier, there are much progress made, although there are still many challenges to support and create further progress, especially to support the global economic recovery. The road is full with new challenges indeed. That's all that I can share with you. I also would like to give you a rhyme because everyone is presenting rhyme. I also have a rhyme with me. From the Colosseum in Rome to Senayan in Jakarta. We have our morning jog in GBK Jakarta, Senayan. So please respond. Spaghetti carbonara to a bowl of chicken coconut soup. Thank you everyone for your contribution in ensuring the success of Indonesia first FMCBG, Indonesia G20 for recover stronger, recover together.
Thank you so much. I'd like to read out one more rhyme. Otherwise, the person making it may protest. Going to the park, looking at Rafflesia flowers. On your way home, you get on a scooter. Let's support Indonesia's G20 presidency. Recover together, recover stronger. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to media friends. And I would like to also thank the organizing committee from Bank Indonesia and from the Finance Ministry, as well as other government institutions. I know that we have so much help from everyone and supporting the organization of this first finance ministers and central bank governors meeting as part of the G20 event. It is not easy for sure, as we are still in the middle of the ongoing pandemic, and not to mention the rain. And every time we are going to organize an event, we need to check the weather forecast, and there's just so much logistical preparation that needs to be done. So I'm aware of the extraordinary work of all teams, and I see that you are implementing the health protocols, but I know you're also tired. You lose sleep for the past 2, 3 days. Thank you so much, everyone, and please stay supportive to one another, because this is not the first or the last meeting, because we're going to have the series of meeting until end of this year. So let's stay healthy, stay strong, recover together, and after at the end of the series of meeting, we can recover together and recover stronger. Thank you so much, and peace be upon us all. Madam Minister, would you be so kind to ask 2 questions, to have 2 questions? Yes, of course. Thank you. But in order to ask your question, you also have to deliver a rhyme. We have 2 questions from Gayatri from Reuters and Anya from AFP. So the person raising the question, we kindly ask you to activate your camera. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies. My apologies that I cannot activate my camera. It's the evening and I'm not sure I'm camera worthy, and I'm my deepest apologies because I don't have a rhyme, but I would like to congratulate you for concluding the meetings so far and for having agreement with other G20 countries. Have just one question about the statement in the communique. We heard, is this true that there's a debate on the wording of geopolitical tension, because we've heard that there were some objections from some countries, because considering the geopolitical tension and the risk of conflict in Ukraine at this time. So I would like to have your clarification. My second question is, can we have what other issues, the sticking points? You know that the meeting went on for quite a long time today, so would like to ask your clarification on this. Thank you, Gayatri. The second question is from Anya. The floor is yours. Good evening, Your Excellencies. Thank you for the opportunity. I have similar questions with Gayatri. And so we know that we've heard that there's a lengthy discussion on your joint communique. We would like to hear more about how the discussion went on, and how did you finally reach an agreement that satisfy all parties. Thank you. And we have just one more from Lukman from NHK. Lukman. Good evening, Your Excellency. Following up on the previous 2 questions, is the sanction from Russia imposed on Ukraine, was it discussed during your meeting? Russia's sanction imposed on Ukraine, did you discuss that in your meeting? Thank you. Thank you, Lukman, for that question. So thank you, Your Excellencies. You have 3 questions. The floor is yours. Thank you for the questions. First of all, this we've had finance track G20 meetings, and yes, there were items that have been agreed on the previous G20 meetings on the finance track, but we also expect to see more progress on other issues. So yes, it's natural to have different expectations, but it's about how we can bridge and navigate the differences. In this G20 series, Indonesia is leading the way towards collaboration, and to build collaboration requires time. And so it's about bridging the gap. If we can imagine one issue, we would need time to discuss and to take into account the insights or the opinions, the concerns from different parties involved from the different countries, and to uh, have statements or to show that there's goodwill from all of us. And so, yes, we discuss all issues, very all encompassing. For example, the geopolitical, someone mentioned about Ukraine. We did not discuss that issue per se because it was a finance track meeting, but we understand that geopolitical situation has effects, has spillover effects on economy, on financial situation, and the uh, prospect of economic recovery globally. And so we need to treat the issue, making sure that the geopolitical situation will not undermine the efforts of global economic recovery, because efforts of recovery are ongoing, but they are not evenly distributed right now. So to formulate those wordings, yes, it required the time, because at the same time in that meeting room, we have countries sitting in the meeting, and they are involved in that geopolitical tension. And so we had to bridge the gap, and we're thankful that we're able to reach an agreement. And we're able to agree that yes, economic recovery is ongoing. We understand that there are gaps, there are disparities, and we acknowledge the factors, the aspects that we need to address to make sure that recovery can be a reality for everyone, including addressing geopolitical situation. There are also other factors. For example, we talk about sustainable finance. One country is very ready, prepared to apply carbon market, carbon price. There are countries that haven't been ready, and we need to formulate and to reach an agreement in a spirit of collaboration, spirit of togetherness, as stated in the Paris Agreement, in the Glasgow meeting, where we want to pursue for a zero emission. And at the same time, we want to honor the UNFCCC process. And so we talk about track finance and how the finance track can contribution without undermining the existing and previous processes. And so these discussions are important to make sure that we don't misunderstand each other, that we can correct understandings, and also to bridge between different opinions. And so we can agree on what's our priority so that we can promote the sustainable finance agenda. So these are some of the items that may take more time to be agreed on. And the other issue is treatment on low-income countries and with their debt crisis. In this communique, it's very specifically mentioned 3 countries that are in the process of negotiating their debts. And the countries are Chad, Zambia, and Ghana. No, sorry, not Ghana, Ethiopia. So I repeat, Chad, Ethiopia, and Zambia. So those countries are specified in our communique. So to discuss the debt situation of these countries, we have creditors among G20 members, and they each have their own mechanism of debt negotiation. And this is shows the importance of us leading the discussion and bridging the gap. What's very important is, from Indonesia's point of view in its G20 presidency, is that these countries need to our assistance, and we continue to try to facilitate that assistance and try to communicate, especially with countries that serve as the creditors to those three countries. And because of the pandemic, so many countries have had to carry out fiscal expansion, and so the debt sustainability of countries, especially among the low income group, is something we find quite vulnerable. This is also should be the attention of G20, because previously G20 has agreed on a common framework to address the debt treatment of certain countries. And even not only that, we've also discussed about debt suspension initiative that would give time for countries experiencing significant difficulty to repay their debts, so that they can have this a period of suspension. So these are issues that are being discussed and will continue to be discussed. They are complex and difficult topics to address, and especially because it's about uh, the well-being of countries of low income but high indebted countries. So in managing and in leading the meetings, we have to hear the opinions of everyone in the table if we want to reach an agreement. And especially because this also concerns the credibility of G20 as a group of states with powerful economies that can lend a hand to countries that are struggling or in difficulty. So those are my answers. We do not discuss specifically about Ukraine, but we do discuss the spillover effects of that situation to the economic and global recovery. Thank you. Peace be upon us all. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you, Your Excellencies, Madam Minister, Mr. Governor. We have 98 journalists from Indonesia and abroad attending our press conference today. The Indonesia's G20 presidency is colored by Indonesia's tradition, and the first meetings have been successfully organized. The G20 presidency is a success for a more prosperous and just world. Thank you. We conclude the conference now, and thank you for your attendance.